What's up guys, it's Scott here and welcome back to Fudge Muppet. Today I'm excited to share with you our latest remastered Skyrim build, and this one was actually recommended to us by a fan who spoke to us last week during our first Twitch stream. That's right guys, we are officially on Twitch and we will be properly beginning our stream schedule very soon. So if you're interested, check out the link in the description. But back to the video. With a fleshed out backstory, revitalized roleplaying and tons of new skills and perks, this is the Barbarian. The Barbarian is exactly as ferocious and wild as his name suggests. Raised by a pack of wolves, the Barbarian grew under the watchful eye of Hircine, Daedric Prince of the Hunt, and with his guidance and support he has grown into one of Skyrim's most savage warriors. He may have a poor grasp over the common language, but nothing is lost in translation on the battlefield, as the mighty weight of his Dragonbone Warhammer crushes his enemies into the dust. No amount of armor will save his enemies from the sheer force of his swings, and like a beast of the forests, he kills his prey dressed head to toe in furs. Before we get started, don't forget that there are timestamps in the description to help you navigate throughout the video, but with that said, let's get things going with the Barbarian's race, standing stone, and stats. The Barbarian is a Nord of Skyrim and gives him the unique battle cry ability, sending a target fleeing for 30 seconds. He has a innate 50% resistance to frost. His Northern Blood grants him a bonus of +10 to two-handed and 5 to block, light armor, and smithing. Take the Lover Stone early on for leveling purposes and then switch out to the Atronach Stone for the best protection from mages. The Barbarian has no ranged options, so mages could be his weakness if not for this incredibly powerful standing stone. As for the stats spread, put 80% into health, as he'll certainly need all the help he can get going full on offensive in just his furs, then put the remaining 20% into stamina for power attacking. The Windwalker perk will also help stamina. With all the werewolf perks, both of these stats will be hugely increased in the werewolf form. The Barbarian was the son of two lowly peasants on the outskirts of Falkreath. Their family was the epitome of a struggling serf household. They had a small plot of land with a moderately fertile soil, just fertile enough to grow enough wheat to sell in the markets, and their family had just welcomed its 5th member. The Barbarian's father had a difficult time feeding his wife and his 2 daughters, and now, after an unwanted pregnancy, he knew he would never be able to support this newborn. On a cool autumn evening, he took his son in his arms, looked deep into his innocent blue eyes, and he wept. His wife knew what he was about to do, but she couldn't face the reality and had retired to bed. So the Barbarian's father took the responsibility onto his own shoulders. He wrapped the baby Barbarian in a thick wool cloak, the very best piece of fabric his family owned, and he wandered into the forest at their back doorstep. He walked for an hour. The only light guiding him came from the silver moon overhead. And as he walked, he pondered why he wrapped the boy in his finest, warmest cloak. He was not strong enough to do what he was about to do, and somehow giving the child his most luxurious, not to mention expensive, item gave him some semblance of peace of mind. A dark thought crept in as he stopped in a moonlit glade. The boy would never survive. It didn't matter how much warmth the wool cloak provided. He was sentencing his own blood, his firstborn son, to death. His hands felt dirty, but he knew. He knew his son would never survive the winter to come, regardless of what he did. He pulled the cloak tight around his little boy, covering his tiny pink ears and casting a shadow over the bright blue eyes that so vividly resembled his mother's, and then placed his son on the middle of the glade, hoping the full moon would act as a crib ornament, putting him to sleep so he'd die in peace. And then he tore his gaze away and turned to walk home without looking back. The baby Barbarian woke to the sound of distant howling, and he cried out for his mother's breast, adding his voice to the sounds of the wild. From the wooded edge of the glade, a pack of wolves emerged. The first to smell the Barbarian licked his lips and stalked over. This kind of meat was a rare treat. Before the wolf could lick the infant's bright pink skin, the alpha growled. His voice sent shivers down the spines of his pack, and the eager, hungry wolf took a cautious step back. The alpha wolf sniffed at the Barbarian and plucked him up, holding him by the cuff of the cloak wrapped tightly around him. The Barbarian was blissfully unaware of the carnivorous creatures surrounding him, and he simply laughed and sputtered, happy to have company and warm breath hitting his cold neck. The wolves raised the boy as their own. He suckled from the den mother as a newborn, and then when older, the alpha reserved small portions of their prey to feed the child, and slowly he grew strong. A scholar would have been baffled by what was happening. They'd wonder why on earth these natural predators took a human baby as their own. A religious person would have insisted on the involvement of some god or Daedric prince. Either way, the alpha wolf felt an instinctual obligation to raise the boy, and with good red meat, and a life of adversity in the wild forests, the barbarian grew gradually into a mighty warrior. One day, the wolf pack was prowling the Velothi Mountains, where they met Eastmarch, and they stumbled across a carriage. The wheels were shattered, spokes were littered around the snow-covered ground, and the carriage driver was dead. His body was well preserved by the snows, and the pack took advantage of that, sharing the spoils of the almost frozen meat. The barbarian grunted, allowing his brothers and sisters to eat their fill. While they did, he looked inside the carriage. A woman and 2 children, presumably her children, sat huddled in the corner. They had died in each other's embrace. Deep inside his bones, the barbarian felt a terrible sadness, despite the fact he knew very little of humans. In the youngest child's hand was a book. The cover was colourful and covered with pretty drawings. He was curious about this strange item. That night, after eating his fill of meat and fruitlessly trying for 3 hours to understand the children's book, the barbarian wrapped himself up in his cloak and drifted off to sleep. The woods in which they'd set up camp were still and silent, yet something caused the barbarian to wake up. He opened his eyes and sat up, and in the distance, he saw a glow. It was pale blue, like a mountain stream. The rest of the pack slept soundly, and he tried not to wake them as he stood up and stalked in the direction of the peculiar light. As he drew closer, he saw that the light was emanating from a huge quadrupedal figure. It was a wolf, but its fur was unlike any wolf he'd ever seen. Its edges flickered like flames, and its body was completely translucent. The barbarian could see the trees behind the wolf obscured slightly by the ethereal wolf's form. The figure spoke suddenly in a powerful voice and told him to follow, and so he did. He followed the ethereal wolf deep into the forest until a familiar scent of death wafted into the barbarian's nostrils. There, in a small opening, was a dead creature. It was half wolf, half human. It couldn't be. The figure spoke again. It told him of werewolves and the other were-creatures of Tamriel. It told him he was destined to become a mighty warrior, a lycanthrope like the dead creature before him. The last thing the barbarian remembered was the figure telling him it was his fate and that Hircine had willed it. When he woke again, he was back in his original sleeping spot, and it was morning. One word resonated inside of his head over and over: Hircine. That night he found that he could make out the words of the book he had tried to decipher. It was like a god had bestowed knowledge upon him. Memories of that vision never left him, but he continued to grow into a warrior, and by the time he was an adult, he was the pack's most powerful killer. They were off hunting all manners of animals: foxes, snow hares, even bears in the Jural Mountains. When they stumbled upon the unfamiliar clang and clamor of steel on steel, humans, he thought in a panic. When they attacked in unison with their metal cloaks and steel claws, they were unstoppable. The pack retreated hastily, but despite his prowess, the barbarian was never as fast as his companions. He got separated in the heavy snows, and he was captured by the men in red cloaks. After escaping, Helgen the barbarian will be a lone wolf. He feels a connection to Hircine, and his subconscious mind seems to lead him to the companions in Whiterun. This will eventually lead him to learning the secrets of lycanthropy. He will have little in common with the mortals of Tamriel, having spent his entire life away from civilization, and he will be focused on ensuring his own survival by any means. When dealing with mortals in conversation, he will always pick the simplest, least fancy speech option, as he only knows the bare essentials of the common language. He doesn't hate people who are different to him, as you could argue that would have to include Nords and anything that isn't a wolf, but he will sympathize with Stormcloak values of protecting one's land and one's kin, so he will slowly integrate into their ranks. As a man who grew up in the forests, he has knowledge of almost all the flora and fauna of Skyrim. This makes him a natural alchemist. He can concoct drug-like potions capable of sending him into the aggressive, crazed states, allowing him to be far more deadly in combat. As for factions, he will of course join the companions to become a werewolf as early as possible. He'll join the Stormcloaks for the Civil War questline. He will follow the main story, considering power over the dragon shouts to be his own form of howling like a wolf, and this will extend into the Dragonborn DLC. If you meet the Dawnguard and the Dawnguard DLC, side with them to destroy the vampires. So now that we have the barbarian's backstory, role-playing, and factions, this is how it will come together in his skills, spells, perks, and his overall playstyle. The main skills for this build will be two-handed, block, light armor, smithing, and alchemy. The barbarian won't be using any spells, but there are some shouts you may want to implement into the gameplay, including Call of Valor and Elemental Fury. The first of which allows you to summon an ethereal hero from the Hall of Valor in Sovngarde, and the latter adds wind speed to your weapons, improving attack speed by 100% for 15 seconds. Also, once you advance far enough in the companions to choose a totem of Hircine, take the totem of Brotherhood so you can summon 2 ethereal wolf spirits to aid you in combat. But with that said, let's look at the Barbarian's essential perks. Firstly, make sure you get all the werewolf perks once you have the werewolf form. But after that, we have two-handed. The Barbarian didn't learn to fight like a knight in the tilt yard of some great castle. No, the Barbarian learned to kill with ferocity, the way wolves kill their prey. The Barbarian therefore fights with fury, tearing through opponents with a chaotic grace. He does this with his two-handed warhammer crafted from the bones of dragons. From the two-handed skill tree, go for the middle branch in its entirety, and then 3 ranks of Skull Crusher. Skull Crusher will add a whole lot of crunch to those warhammer swings, as attacks with warhammers will ignore 75% of armor. Also, Devastating Blow is great for the 25% damage bonus to standing power attacks, as well as the welcome addition of Decapitation. A mighty two-handed weapon makes quick work of enemies caught in its swing, but also acts as a formidable shield, and the Barbarian makes good use of that fact. From the block skill tree, take quick reflexes, and then the right-hand branch up to Disarming Bash. With Power, Deadly, and Disarming Bash, you'll have the useful ability to damage enemies and even disarm them when bashing with your weapon in a defensive position. The Barbarian couldn't keep up with the wolves if he wandered the forests in a massive steel-heavy armor. In fact, he's entirely oblivious to the practice of wearing metal armor, simply electing to smash his way through it with his warhammer. In the forest, the Barbarian dressed like a man among beasts. He dressed in furs. From the light armor skill tree, we suggest taking everything except for matching set. With deft movement, you will actually avoid all damage from 10% of the melee attacks that hit you. Fending for himself in the wilderness made the Barbarian quite practical, and he had to learn to make his own equipment. Smithing is a new concept to the Barbarian, but with the right tools, he catches on quick. From the smithing skill tree, we recommend grabbing the left-hand branch up to dragon smithing. And finally, we have alchemy. As I mentioned before, the Barbarian's life connected him to nature, and even if he can't identify them by name, he knows all about every plant and animal in Skyrim. From the alchemy skill tree, take all ranks of alchemist as well as the entire right-hand side. 3 ranks of experimenter work well with the Barbarian's role-playing. He may not know the ingredient by name, but one taste and will know all 4 of its effects. Also, purity is great as it removes the negative effects from his created potions and the positive effects from his poisons. So that's all pretty straightforward, but here's how it will work in game. You will want to start things off by drinking a potion, and then it's as simple as charging into battle with your warhammer, swinging and bashing and crushing all your enemies to a bloody pulp. Power attacks will be unstoppable, and even sprinting power attacks will work really well with his perks. If there are no guards or citizens around, you have the option to switch into werewolf form. This will not only help you travel long distances, but will give you an alternative in combat. If you take on some bandits as a werewolf, you can tear them to pieces, feed on them, and even call upon 2 ethereal wolves to fight alongside you. As for gear, you'll want a dragonbone warhammer smithed up to its maximum potential. In terms of armor, get a standard set of fur armor, but instead of the headpiece, use the Stormcloak officer's helmet. All of this should be smithed up too. Thanks to alchemy, you should have a steady supply of fortified two-handed potions, as well as any others you may want to use, like stamina regen or health regen. There's also the option to create a smithing potion before crafting and improving your armor. There are 2 rings you'll want to have on you. The first is the Ring of Bloodlust, which should be worn for your main transformation into werewolf form, and then there is the Ring of Hircine for any additional transformations after the initial one. Subscribe to Fudge Muppet if you're new to the channel, and give the video a like if you enjoyed it. This has been our remastered Barbarian. Don't forget that timestamps can be found in the description below, as well as links to all of our social media accounts and our Twitch channel. We look forward to seeing you guys and interacting with you in real time once we start streaming. As always, thanks so much for watching, guys. My name is Scott, and I will see you in the next one.